Welcome to Smart in the City, the Bible podcast where we bring together top actors in the smart city arena, sparking dialogues and interactions around the stakeholders and themes most prevalent for today's citizens and tomorrow's generations. I am your host, Tamlin Shimizu, and I hope you will enjoy this episode and gain knowledge and connections to accelerate the change for a better urban life. Smart in the City is brought to you by Bible Smart Cities. We enable processes from research and strategy development to co-creation and implementation. To learn more about us, please visit the Bible platform at bible-smartcities.eu. So welcome back, everyone. Today is another episode of our series, and we're traveling to Vilnius, Lithuania, a city that has embraced smart regulation and innovation culture under the leadership of our guest, who's going to talk all about it. So with us today, I have Remigijus Šimašius. He's the former mayor of Vilnius, former minister of justice, and now involved in many different initiatives across the city and country, and I think European-wide as well. So he's going to tell you more about that and tell us about all of the work that he's done during his mayorship as well. So welcome so much, Remy.
Hello, everyone. So first of all, congratulations, Tamlin, on making this challenge, pronouncing my name and so on.
I did it, yeah.
you did it. I know it's challenging, so Remy for short is perfect. So yes, I was a mayor of this beautiful city for 8 years, for 2 terms. Decided that it's enough. It has to go without me further, and I will have to go other ways. Yes, I was a Minister of Justice before, and now I'm in different initiatives, starting with helping public institutions how to reduce regulatory burden. Not regulation per se, but regulatory burden. I think it's very important. Tiny distinction. And I'm also advising one startup working in GovTech with AI tools to help, again, reduce burden and flow. And some other initiatives, also public initiatives, trying to help Ukraine in some aspects, all these things. So interesting life.
Very interesting life. We're going to get into that more in a second. To start us off, I want to warm up a little bit with a question, a teaser question. And that question is, for you, if Vilnius was an animal, which animal would it be and why?
Okay, these were more questions. Always have to be easy.
It's the hardest.
Always
question.
Have to be easy. I don't know. So I don't know what animal I am.
You can also hypothesize on that if you like.
Okay, let's say. Okay, I will say it. I think Vilnius is a unicorn. You think they do not exist, but in fact they do.
Like a company is a unicorn, as in that way?
Both the company and the companies are unicorns because they are unicorns, because people think that they do not exist, but in fact they do exist sometimes. And actually in Vilnius we even have a unicorn public transport station called Unicorn. Because two our the city unicorns are situated right by this public transport stations.
Okay, there you go. All right, good answer. And if you were an animal, now you have to also...
Okay, let's pick up for something. I would be a dog.
Okay, I like that answer. I love dogs. So, do you have a dog?
Not now, but
okay.
Yes, I did have, and I like this dog mentality.
Yeah, friendly and just great creatures. So wonderful. You've mentioned a little bit about all the things that you've gotten into, but can you tell me a bit more about that journey? Where are you from? How did you become mayor? How did you become minister? All of this story that leads you here today.
Yeah. I'm a lawyer by profession, so I decided to study law because I thought it's interesting. Funny thing, because I didn't choose some other professions because I didn't want to be engaged with the government. But
and then you became the government.
That's a funny part of the story. But yes, I was a lawyer, but I mainly was doing economic analysis of law. I was working for a think tank and then running this think tank called Lithuanian Free Market Institute, which was advocating free market reforms. And these reforms were quite successful, and that's partly the answer why Lithuania is successful on European Union level. I mean, we are like medium country in terms of GDP per capita, but back then we were like half of average. So that's the fastest growing country in the European Union. Then somehow I was seduced to politics.
How were you seduced? I want to hear this story.
Okay. I was for short a member of city council, but that's like part-time job. So that's not, it's serious, but not as serious. But then I decided to give up on this and then concentrated on my think tank. But then one day, leaders of party who were forming government called me and said, okay, please join us and be a minister of justice. And I, of course, said no. They said, okay, I'll call you tomorrow.
You slept on it and you changed your mind.
And I decided, it's kind of tricky thing when you're always telling others what to do. And when you are offered a chance to make an impact yourself, it's quite not appropriate decision not to pick up this opportunity. So I decided yes to pick up it. So I was a Minister of Justice for 4 years. Did quite important reforms, especially in this reducing regulatory burden. I think it was okay. If you want to, we can talk about it later because it's really very interesting. I think. Then for short, I was a member of parliament, and then I decided to run for mayor's election. It's a direct election, popular election, because I thought, okay, that was very, very practical things because I love this city, and I thought that it's not run properly. I thought that also, unfortunately, had issues with corruption and intransparency, so very practical things. But then, of course, when you start the campaigning and all these things, of course, I dived very deep into it and all these urban structures and all this running of the city. So yeah, I'm really now in love with cities in general and with my cities. So I was then re-elected and then decided in the middle of my second term that it's okay, I will not go for the third one. And here I am doing all different nice things like helping others how to reduce regulatory burden and how to use smart tools to run the governments. So that's very, very interesting again.
Yeah, very interesting. I want to dive more into that and
I'm teaching at the university as well. So
busy doing lots of things and carrying your experiences forward with you. As mayor, you mentioned corruption. What were some of the key strategies you employed to transform the city?
First strategy, which is like lowest hanging apple and very, very important, was the radical open data policy. Radical one. So, I was calling it no excuse open data policy. So because we were opening up everything, and of course, that helped a lot because suddenly you understand that, when there's light somewhere, there's more open data, so people may ask questions, and that's very important. So that's number one. Then what I did, I introduced the OECD principles for corporate governance in municipally owned companies. Actually, it's a funny story about it because I was helping to introduce this principle when I was minister. It was under other Minister of Economy, but I was helping to do it. But then, of course, I thought, of course, for municipal companies, we have to do it the same. And I thought that, okay, we are catching up with someone because everybody else is doing this and so on and so on. Then I realized that we are not catching up because quite few cities are actually doing it because it's not even required by UCD. They do not focus on municipal level. They do not focus even on land level, just on federal or national level. So, but we implemented these principles, which made it much better. When we had these metrical debates during my second election, it was very funny when I was able to name kind of these millions, which I think were stolen because there was no other rational explanations before. Yeah. So this was very interesting. So there's maybe two main policies, and then of course it's a kind of moral conduct. Basically you're choosing right people. You show by example, and all these things. I think these are very important because, again, sometimes that some of the people who are working in public sector, unfortunately, tiny portion of them are looking for their personal benefit, but not for public benefit, and you have to get rid of them. That's as simple as that. It's not the main tool, but it's a very important tool.
Yeah.
Persuasion and big goals and all these things, they do help with 90% of people, but with some percent, you just have to get rid of them. So that's also part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're talking about regulation, can you share examples of innovative regulatory approaches that you've used? Tell us more about this regulation approach.
Okay, I'm thinking maybe about those related to the city. Okay, just let's pick one very simple one, which relates to everyone. For example, let's take the noise control issue in the city, which is terribly difficult. I mean, because some people want to go party and some people want to go sleep, and that's always
the contrast in every city.
I remember one Sunday I was invited to talk at some event, some club for young people. It was Sunday morning, and it was like 10 o'clock in the morning and something. And I was entering the building, and it was actually a nightclub nearby, and I was seeing people who were still alive, and some other people are already awoke. So you can imagine what the kind of mismatch of lifestyles in the city, and you have to manage it. So noise control, and of course you always have this issue when somebody's calling like governmental agencies that you hear the noise, you have to turn it off, and so how it works. So, for example, a tiny innovation, but it's extremely tiny. Well, we introduced the procedure that first you have to go to complainant and to check what's the situation, and then to go to typically the pub, which is like issuing this noise. Then how it changed? First conclusion is that some of complaints are fake, because in some cases there are no neighbors, there are competitors.
Okay.
There are competitors who, of course, they do want clients to their pub, but not the competitor's pub. So one of the tricks is to post a complaint. And of course, when you're not able to go to the flat which is complaining, I mean, then all this like corrupt system fails. But if there is a real complainant, of course, if a person, kind of public servant, goes to a family who wants their child to go sleep, and then it goes back to the pub, and pub says, no, it's okay. And the person can say, no, just look, 5 minutes ago, I was there. I don't know the situation. And it's on a human level, it's much more persuasive. And okay, it doesn't solve all the problems, but it reduces problems by like 90% or something. So that's like very, very typical city life situation. Or we may take a more complicated one, for example, shared mobility, all these bicycles, scooters, cars, or whatever. But let's take cars, for example. Vilnius is number one city in the world in terms of shared cars per capita. And how did we achieve that? And again, these tiny innovations, how and when you can leave a car, if it's residents only, so is it for share cars or not for share cars? Can you enter there? So on these flexible payment opportunities. I mean, if you're a customer, how you pay for parking and so on. All the kind of several tiny innovations, and suddenly, from lagging behind, we are number one in the world. So that's a good illustration, I think, how this regulatory innovation and how you apply this innovation, this regulation, it has a huge impact. All in all, I'm very happy that, for example, FDI, this ranking of the cities, they ranked Vilnius as the most business-friendly city among medium-sized cities. So this is kind of part of it. It doesn't show all of this, but it's quite a significant part of the story.
Okay, really interesting. When you're talking about regulation, when we think about innovation, oftentimes regulation is seen as kind of an enemy to innovation. How do you strike this balance between allowing innovation to flourish, but also drawing the line with regulation?
In fact, it is an enemy of innovation, of course. But then, of course, you have regulation, which is typically to achieve, it has to achieve some goals. And again, first of all, one of the tools in this case, we created the sandbox environment in Vilnius, not just creating particular areas, geographical or like topic areas, but in general announcing that Vilnius is a sandbox for innovation. So basically, very clearly opening doors for innovation and saying that if you want to try something, and this is not exactly what is fitting into regulation. So this is the one-stop show, the door, please come, say, and we will allow you. And we were positioning ourselves as a kind of like a starting market for many innovation on European level, because we were selling this to companies. So if you're able to do this in Vilnius, which is in European Union, the same regulation and so on, so probably you can do it somewhere else as well. So basically deliberate approach to do this, and then deliberate help. So that was the main thing. And in general, trying to be more flexible when people were like complaining about things that you have to regulate. So being a little bit skeptical on every step. Do you really need to regulate it, or you need to have some agreement? For example, for the same shared mobility, of course, all these questions especially about scooters, all these are difficult questions.
Yeah.
So I initiated a memorandum between providers of these services and the city, how we exchange data, how we exchange problems, how we deal with this. And again, all these innovations that were coming up in Vilnius first, for example, like, okay, if you provide electric scooters in the city, of course, there are some areas which is okay for scooters, but not Friday night or Saturday night. The same like social drinking areas. Yeah. And we were like taking this from the areas which are possible to run the scooter. And suddenly it benefits everyone. It benefits municipality because like less complaints that somebody is rushing into somebody. For service providers, it's better because, okay, less incidents. That's also good. For those people who are maybe not in the most sober condition in there, also more safe. So basically this is about talking and agreement. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, talking is a very powerful tool for humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. But how do you not just talk and then move to implementation is also the challenge, right?
Yeah, of course.
So from your perspective, how do you move that from talking to action?
I think it's an illusion that we may avoid action. We always act, that's my perception. That comes also from my economic analysis and legal analysis, because, if you avoid decision making, it's also your decision to avoid decision making. So basically,
it's also an act of its own.
It's also an act of its own. So basically the problem is not about non-acting. Mm-hmm. Problem is about acting improperly or not taking all the serious issues into account. And the measure how to take serious issues into account, of course, is big data analysis, but also listening to stakeholders. And actually, this is about talking. When you talk, I mean, very often you get surprised about the other people's opinions, what's actually the problem, and what the potential solutions. And when you talk, of course, you get creative and then you act more wisely. So that's it. Because not to act is impossible. Because, okay, do we allow scooters in the street or not allow? I mean, allowing is not acting. Forbidding is acting. Or not, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So city cannot escape action. It's just what kind of action?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, that's maybe too philosophical, but I think it's very practical at the same time.
Yeah, no, I like it. It makes me think a little bit more about some of how we're thinking about these things, right? So what do you think is one thing that you did as mayor that now in hindsight you're like, oh gosh, I shouldn't have done it that way. I would do it differently now.
Okay, there's a very, very specific thing.
Yeah.
I mean, when I became but this is very Vilnius-centered. Mm-hmm. When I became a mayor, we had a very awful kind of lighting system in Vilnius. So basically it was old, so it was in very bad shape. It was like turning off. I mean, out of these light bulbs, many were not working. All this kind of ugly stuff. I mean, that was quite difficult for European cities like 10 years ago. So we were like rushing into renovation, into like economy saving, into this LED and all these things. And we did it successfully according to our plan. That was very good. But then I realized that, my kind of criteria for this coziness, I had this criteria. I mean, I was not making this Brugge mistake when they spoiled the city. But I thought that it was still too low. We had to do it a little bit better. So basically, when we changed this like lighting stoves into the same style but new ones, then I understood that no, we had to change it more radically into more human friendly. I mean, simply technical things. They're too high. They are too centered for car drivers and less centered for pedestrians, and all this kind of stuff, which would have turned the city into much more cozy than it was. So actually, I realized it in the middle of the process when 2/3 of the like things were done already. Then it would change it radically, like starting with the color of lighting stoves. I mean, now they're painted in black instead of this kind of this metal 50 shades of gray kind of thing. So it's much nicer now. But okay, we missed some opportunities. So missed opportunities the thing.
Yeah.
So this one is a success, which was not success in a way.
If there's a mayor starting their term tomorrow, say, what piece of advice would you give them?
Okay, so the cities are so different.
Yeah, it has to be, I guess, a bit more general advice rather than, yeah.
I think, okay, to be very genuine about what you want to achieve and how to align your vision with the vision of your clients, which means citizens or investors and everyone. I think, again, we're being very open and very creative and very precise. For example, for me, what worked very well, again, speaking about the same business friendliness, I remember when, like, during the first week, I initiated already the meeting with the main companies, international companies, Vilnius, of course, like second or third week, we had a meeting with the main question from my side, okay, now elections are over. What can I do as a mayor for Vilnius to be more investable or more friendly for you? And the answers I got surprised me so much. And it was such a good focus for me for the next few years, because basically I got three answers. One is like better quality public spaces. The second one, better quality public transport. And the third was better kindergartens. And it was so related to actually what I was planning to do, but with a little different shape. That was so easy to focus and to sell it also to other businesses and to know what is actually important. Because when somebody else was coming to me, to my office, when, for example, Lithuania was already shortlisted for the investment, but then we're looking for this cultural proximity. So is it the right place to land or not? Mm-hmm. So I knew what to speak about, and I knew what we were still lacking. And I was saying that now we are working on it, and we did work on it, and we solved these problems. And that was part of the success story. So that's aligning and being very open about this. I think this is the most important part.
Yeah, really good advice. I like that. And I guess I know you accomplished a lot during your terms, but I'm guessing that there's still a lot of work to be done in Vilnius. What would you say are the biggest challenges that Vilnius is still facing? And what do you think, what tools would you take today to accelerate the change in the city?
Again, there's one very specific problem and issue related to urban structure of cities like Vilnius. So it's especially typical for Central and Eastern European cities, but also for Western European cities which were developed during the modernistic era. When we have a cozy city, we realized that the typical quarter of the city is no more than 2 hectares. I mean, that's a magical thing.
Yeah.
It took some time for us to realize it. And I'm quite surprised that many urbanists didn't quantify it. Yeah. So it's no more than 2 hectares. Typical modernistic quarter is 7 to 9 hectares. And that explains a lot. That explains how this block houses built during Soviet era in our city, and it's half of the city basically. Mm-hmm. And in other cities, most of the cities, again, even in the Western European cities, that's the same. Why they do look so unfriendly, so inhumane? And because you don't have proper streets, you don't have the human kind of scale, and basically you have to cut these quarters into smaller ones. And instead of having this as people call it, yards in the city, which are not yards because they don't have like entrance into the yard. The quasi yards, quasi street, quasi parking lots in between buildings. So I think reconstructing this city is a big challenge for these cities, including Vilnius, because when you'll go in the central part and so on, so nice and so on. But again, for this like modernistic city and then post-Soviet city, I think it's still some challenging and still some regulation. Actually, this doesn't allow to have that very smooth transformation, and this transformation also related to habits of people and how people perceive things, to lack of imagination, because people think that the city should look like the city of their childhood looks. So basically, that's all the issues. Very interesting and very challenging, actually.
Yeah. What tools do you think you would need to accelerate the change that you're looking at, you would want in Vilnius now?
That's a very difficult question. Of course, again, talking and explaining not so much about recipes, but explaining the issues and problems. I think it's like all good advertising. I didn't know that at the beginning of my political career, but in order to sell a solution, you have to sell a problem first. Because very often, I mean, I was doing the same mistake, and I'm still doing the same mistake sometimes, because I mean, you think that you know what's the problem and you rush to solve this problem, but it doesn't mean that your clients, your citizens think that this is the problem. So you have to persuade that this is actually the problem, and it's not so easy and it's not so obvious. And if you're successful, people think, okay, that's true. I mean, this place is not as cozy as it can be, and not as functional as it can be, and not as economical or whatever. So now we've got a problem. Let's look for solutions. And then you are aligned and you may look for solutions. So sometimes I was rushing too fast to solve the problems instead of like selling the problems first. And that's one of the big challenges of reformers, I think, of all reformers. I'm a reformer type politician because some are like happy just running things as they are. For me, it's a little bit boring, but I do respect those people who run things as they are, because it's also a very, very important part of it. But not for me, but selling the problem is the issue.
I like that a lot, because that's kind of the tool that you're saying is this communication tool and this sales tool, almost of being able to sell the problem and looking at that from a citizen engagement aspect. So
exactly, it's a sales thing. I mean,
it's like a sales tool. You have to be a good salesman.
And for politicians, during election campaign, of course, you are selling.
You're selling yourself.
Yeah, but
right?
basically, you're selling yourself, you are selling identity, you are selling affiliation with yourself and with the program. And I had it in many cases, I was implementing things, what I had in my program, and I expected that people, of course, voted for me. It means that they voted for my program. But of course, nobody.
They didn't memorize your program.
Of course. About all this tiny deal. We had this debate about, okay, this mayor is like narrowing the streets. I mean, making more pedestrian friendly, more green and so on. So more than half of the city adores it. And less than half, I think, hates it, because they think, okay, I think they're not right, because I was not able to sell the problem for them.
They didn't see that it was a problem.
Because for some people, they still don't see that as a problem. And then, of course, afterwards, it's even more difficult to sell. I mean, we have like metrics again. We calculated the like kilometers of the streets, which are humanized. And we calculated the number of car accidents in the streets, and the car accidents where people were injured and so on. And we have extremely we just before we had 3 times more injuries than now, and it's more cozy and people choose to live there, and everything shows that it's to the better. But still, for some drivers, if you're passing the street, even if it's not reduced the time of your trip, it still somehow annoys some people. Even if it's better looking, safer, it's still, I have to be more cautious when driving. Yes, exactly. That was the point. You have to be more cautious. But for some people, it's still the issue.
You can't please everyone, right? But I really do like that around selling the problem. So with that, I would like to ask you, because, we talked about some interesting aspects, of course, but I'm sure you have a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of experiences. And is there anything that we didn't yet get the chance to talk about? This is the open floor. Many things. Maybe one specific item that you think would be especially important for our listeners to know.
Okay, that relates to all public governance, I think, but also to the city. I think when, again, getting back to this regulation topic, typically we tend to think that regulation is either good or bad. So we either have to have more regulation or less regulation. So it's like black and white, yes or no, dichotomic approach. And I think this is a wrong approach, because basically we have not to speak about how much regulation do we have, but how to apply it wisely. Because it's impossible to apply all regulation 100%. And in Anglo-Saxon legal tradition, they have it like more in their blood, because it's more based on case-by-case principle, which means that you have more general principles on top, and you have case-by-case decision. It's being it's deteriorating in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, unfortunately. But I think it's a good approach when you have a goal, and then you have certain rules, but then still when applying, you have to take all the context in mind, and to apply it wisely. Because I think there are too many people working in public service who think that they don't have to think, that they have to apply rules. And then we have a problem. Because if you don't think, you actually think in the wrong way.
This is like the acting and not acting thing, right? Exactly. If you do not think, then you actually...
tricky thing. Okay. But that's, I think, very important. Because, when you meet a person, all the misbehaviors are equally important. You have to deal with all cases because all of them are important. And, when, for example, when I teach to legal profession, to lawyers, say, if you are a policeman and if you're driving over the city, of course, if you see that there's a problem in the street, typically you have to stop and to interfere. But if you're rushing to a bigger accident, of course you don't have to stop. You have to think. And on a radical thing, when people don't even think that they have to stop, if you have a piece of trash, for example, on the pavement, and you are like an officer, theoretically, you have to start a procedure to find out who left this trash on the pavement, but you do understand that it's nonsense. It's impossible to do this. You don't even start it because culturally you are wise enough, and you think rightly in this case. But in some cases, we don't think in the right way. We think that we have to do everything in a precise thing as described by law, and we don't have to take it from the context into consideration, and that is very wrong. We have to think when applying regulations. So that's very important. So I help people to realize it, and they see that how easy and how difficult it is. But that's a very important part of how flexible and still caring city is functioning.
Yeah, really interesting take on regulation. And I think a really important topic for us to have more thoughts on and more perspectives on as we move forward. Now we get to our segment that we have. And I think you've already inspired us, but I like to have this segment as well to give you space to inspire us a little bit more. Inspire us. Just a little bit, with a story, a quote, or anything that has inspired you recently.
Oh, I was doing quite many reforms, and of course I got both admirers and then the non-supporters, let's say it mildly. So actually this quote from Winston Churchill quite inspires me. That, you have enemies, good. It means you stood up for something sometime in your life. So I think it's important just to pay attention to your clients, but not to be distracted by everyone, because you have to focus. I think it's very important. So I don't know, is it inspiration or not?
Yeah, I like it. It is. I think for leaders, definitely, because,
go do something, you will have enemies. Okay, good inspiration.
If you act, act or not act, you will get enemies, right? So, if you are in a position,
basically you will get enemies always. I mean, sometimes if you pretend that you will do nothing, actually doing nothing is also doing, and some people will hate you because you did nothing.
Yes.
So that's, I mean, it's inescapable. That's part of the job.
But it means that you were in a position that you had influence and you had the ability to impact. And I think that's so important to recognize that you have this ability to impact and to not to not let the negatives get in your.
Let's be fair. That's running the city or even working for the city. Like, the biggest inspiration and the biggest kind of reward is actually to make an impact. To change it. That's the biggest reward. Because some other aspects of being politicians
not so rewarding.
Not so rewarding.
Like the hate from the people,
like hate, and like being recognizable on the street. Okay, that's nice. I mean, during all these 8 years and more, that was always good. With like a couple of not even incidents, but just very, very, very few unfriendly remarks. All just friendly and so nice. But still, I mean, it doesn't make you less free, but it makes you think all the time how you behave. So
for better or for worse.
Yeah,
right?
For better or for worse. I mean, not crossing the street on the red light, even if there are no cars. You are from Germany, so you're not crossing it.
The important thing in Germany is to not do it if there's any children around. That's kind of the societal norm in Germany. So
yeah. Okay, that's what my experience is. Germans do not cross if it's not in Berlin.
But they don't give you a mean eye unless there's children around. Yeah. So
if
that's
you're
the
in
important
France,
thing.
You can do it, whatever. I mean, that's different. But okay, if you are mayor,
never.
So
Okay,
that's a problematic
You're just waiting there.
and again, but I think that's part of this regulatory implementation thing, because red light is a red light. That's you have to obey it all the time. But again, is it really the case? I mean, of course, there are certain situations. I mean, it's not very polite to talk about this. I'm not a politician anymore, so I can talk about it.
Yeah, you're free now. So
you have to focus on it. But being more serious about this, again, for example, when we made in the city some innovations concern about abusing the bus lanes, because you have dedicated bus lanes, of course. And of course, there are some drivers who want to drive this empty lane because, why to have it empty? You have a traffic jam in other lanes. So why not use it? I'm in rush. So instead of placing all these policemen and cameras just on the lane, we installed cameras in front of the bus and in the backwards of the bus. And backwards of the bus is especially important. And the front lines, of course, is even more important, because if the bus stops and the camera films a car in front of it, and the car shouldn't be there, so it means that actually it not just abuses the rule, but actually it makes an impact. It's creating consequences. So then we have to focus on it. If it's in the middle of the night, I mean, if you have some obstacle on the road, for example, and so on, all this question, I'm entitled now to use this 20 meters of bus lane or not. I mean, these are crazy questions. I mean, and it's nonsensical to over focus on this.
Yeah. So that's a good metaphor for the regulation and finding that line, is when it has an impact, negative impact to the operations or to the wider, citizen level or city level initiatives, etc. Then that's
if we would talking about regulation more. I would tell
you like that topic, don't you?
No, I would say that a simple risk management matrix is very important, because there are two criteria basically. Okay, shit happens. So what's the probability of it to happen? And what's the consequences if it happens? And again, you have 4 fields, and you may place everything in these 4 fields. And when you have limited resources, and I mean, who hasn't limited resources? I mean,
Yeah.
it's always limited. So where to focus? That's the question, and how to focus. Of course, there are two easy fields and two more complicated fields.
Yeah.
So, but again, that's the art on how to manage your resources and how to achieve better results with limited resources.
Good point. With that, I would love actually to dig in deeper to this regulation topic and everything, but unfortunately we're nearing the end of our time. So with that, I have the last question for you. It's a question that we ask every single guest, and that question is to you: what is a smart city?
Okay, this simple answer. The city that doesn't make stupid decisions.
There you go. I like it. Simple, straight to the point. Yeah.
That's it.
Good. Okay, perfect. That was easy. Well, with that, thank you so much for your time, Remy. It's really been a pleasure learning more about your experiences and everything with regulation. All of your experiences really have been really enlightening. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tori. Thank you for this conversation.
Anytime. And also thank you to our listeners, of course. Wouldn't happen without you. And don't forget, you can always create a free account on babel-smartcities.eu. And you can find out more about smart city projects, implementations, and more. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening. I'll see you at the next stop on the journey to a better urban life.